Welcome to the Tranås at the Fringe Festival 2020 edition. We are here in Strandbaren, roughly translated the beach bar in Tranås. It's actually the center of the world right now. This is where it's all happening. My name is Jonas Ellerström, pronounced in Swedish. I could change that right now and be Jonas Ellerström, because I will be speaking to Janice D Soderling, who lost the Swedish characteristics of her last name a long time ago, when your forefathers came from Sweden to Indiana in the United States. Janice is one of the cornerstones of the Tranås at the Fringe Festival. Excellent poet, has taken part in all the festivals that I've been to, and during this last year has issued no fewer than 5 books. It's an enormously prolific output, and I will try with one hand to show you this. It's like a hand of cards. All of them are aces. If a pack of cards could contain 6 aces, this is the ones. And I think we could start out very, very directly, Janice, with you reading 2 of your poems from this. This was the last collection up until a couple of hours ago, when Janice showed me what is by now her latest collection, existing in 1 copy only. But War, with subtitle Make That City Desolate, your last official collection. And I will ask you to read 2 very different poems from that.
Okay. One of these poems, excuse me, one of these poems is a formal poem. It's rhyme. And I'm very concerned about the refugees who come over the Mediterranean. So many of them are lost. And this is a poem about that. It's called Mare Nostrum. And that means, as you know, our sea, because that's what the Romans called it, our sea. It is the ghost ship, Hope No More, that sails a bitter sea. Stiff on her misty deck there stands a doleful company. Her sails are spun of baby breath. Her masts are made of bones. Her draught is deep, but deeper still, the halls of Davy Jones. Her keel is carved of hard goodbyes. Her rigging wrought of grief. Her rotting hull is empty as the honor of a thief. She sailed from war and hunger. War and hunger are no more. She sails like fog forever. The good ship, hope no more. Jag blir så rörd när jag läser den. Inte för dikten, men för att den är så sorglig. Att så många människor har fått sätta den. This other poem is a prose poem. It's called The Soldier. All of these poems in this book about some aspect of war. And this is from the perspective of the soldier. The M16 poised, he kicked the door open. On that street, it was the 8th door, maybe the 10th. He wasn't counting. He kicked the door open. In a blue easy chair sat an old woman, eyes closed, holding a little stick from which hung a strip of white cloth like a deflated balloon. He kicked the door open, and she opened her eyes. He shot her because she was unexpectedly there, unexpectedly alive when he kicked the door open. He regretted it later, but there were worse things. Laughing at the child's head, position in the tree cleft, and anyway, she was old.
So the prose poem and the formal one, the rhymed and metered one, they differ not just in having very different forms, but also in the way they treat their content. And this always amazes me when I read your books, that you're such really a masterful verse technician, and also that you seem to know what kind of form, what genre goes with the content. And how do you choose them? Why the ballad form in stark contrast to this very graphic, rather violent prose poem?
After I've been writing for so many years, and it just happens that way. Often I will start with a line. Maybe I wake up in the morning and I have a line in my head, and I think, oh, that's interesting. So then it turns out to be a poem. Sometimes I think I should write about that subject, and then I start looking for something, and then the beginning comes, and it's not really something I decide, but at another time I think I should write a sonnet today. So I do my little thing with the sonnet, and then I think, then I have to look for something to put in the sonnet. So it's both ways. Mm.
You said that you've been writing for so many years, and but you have published only recently, in the last 5 or 6 years or so.
Books, yes, but I've been published all my life in magazines.
Oh yes, there are, at the end of each of your books, there's this long list of where they have been published. That's an interesting and very international world of magazines.
I started before I left the United States. I'm from the United States. I grew up there. And just before I left for Sweden, I sent off a lot of poems to different magazines. I looked them up. And surprisingly, a lot of them were taken. I have never seen them in print, but I got the letter back from the editor that they were published. And then I came to Sweden. And
in what year was that?
1961. And it was quite a different country than it is today. There was the World War II was still apparent in Europe, and it was a very different country than it is today. There were called milk bars. Remember? Yeah.
I don't, but I know of them.
Yeah, and there was we had I don't know what it is in English, portevakt, always a solid lady who sat in front, portière maybe.
La concierge in French, anyway. But.
Yeah, and then I wanted to be a poet. I wanted to be a writer. I used to go to the Humlegården, to the library there, and it was very different than libraries today. You could not speak. You went in very quietly and whispered what you wanted to do. And I said I want Swedish poets because I wanted to translate them.
Did you speak any Swedish at all when coming here?
I learned a little bit on the way over, and I learned every day. I used to buy every week. I worked in a cafe as a dishwasher. And every time I got my salary, I would buy a book of Strindberg. And that's how I learned. And I had a very strange Swedish. Some of it sounded like Strindberg, like from the 1800s. and and some of it was like things that I learned from the little book that I was learning Swedish from. Things that nobody says. I would say, "Vad frisk luften känns." And there's nobody who's ever, I've never heard anybody say that except me. So I was learning as I went along. And obviously, if I'd known what I was doing, I would never have been so pretentious that I sat there and tried to translate. But I learned. That was the good part of it.
Was there anything in your Swedish ancestry? Was that the factor that brought you here? That your great grandfather was in the Royal Guards and rode next to the king? Was that the determining factor in your coming here?
You want to tell you that story?
I want you to tell. I want you not to. I want you to tell everybody. The whole world is listening.
All right. We had a family. My great grandfather went from Sweden. He was from Söderåker, and that's why our name is Soderling, which used to be Soderling, because it was a soldier name, and his name was Pettersson. But when they go into the army, as we know, they get a name because everybody is called Eric Pettersson or Peter Eriksson or something. So they all get a special name. And he got Soderling because he came from Söderåker. And he was, he didn't talk much, so we didn't really have all that many stories about him, but we did have some. And one was, they asked him, Gus, his name was Peter Gustav. Gus, why didn't you teach your children Swedish? Why didn't you teach your children Swedish? He said, I had other things to do. And that was a story that they all told. But the reason he didn't, I think, is because every Swede that came to America didn't want to be a Swede anymore. They wanted to be an American. And so that's probably why he didn't. But
you went did the opposite journey, going back to Sweden.
I did about 100 years later.
What did you hope to find here?
Well, I wasn't really going to stay here. I was going to travel around the world because I thought that's how you become a writer. You travel around the world and you find a war and you drive an ambulance and you work on a ship and you do it. Because I was pretty stupid. I came right out of the cornfields. I used to say, they say, where do you come from, Jonas? I said, Indiana. Okay, what is it like there? It's like if you find your way out of the cornfields, you will stumble over a Bible and fall into a cold pit. That's the way it was. And but it didn't finish about my grandfather. You want to tell me about?
I'm thinking we'll leave that hanging.
Okay.
Because I do think that you are to me, you are more interesting than your grandfather.
Okay.
Really.
Okay.
And there is one of those books that actually, it is a story of your life. And read us one poem from that.
Okay. This is Rooms and Closets. And it's about various rooms in my life, and closet, as you know, that's something that people come out of. And so, which one were we going to take from this one? On the irreversibility of time. I use such big words I can't pronounce them. It says, time does not go backward. Have you ever seen a broken teacup put itself together? And yet there is a room where the blue cup is whole and heavy with steaming tea. The smell of cinnamon rises from sticky buns. Brown cubes of sugar wait to splash and melt as the breeze lifts from newly mown grass and moves, ghost-like and inquisitive, among flimsy gauze curtains. There is a room where certain words have not yet fallen, where the blue teacup is whole.
The title of that poem, On the Irreversibility of Time, did you put that in? Was that the title to begin with, or did you put it in after writing the poem? Because there's an interesting contrast between the title and the lines that follow the contents of the poem itself.
Because this book is about looking back on my life, or other people's lives also, you do think a lot about when you can't change things. Things are the way they are. If you break a cup, it doesn't just reassemble. And I think it's a long time ago since I wrote that poem, but as I recall, it came together. They both came together. I knew what I was writing about, and I chose that title.
Because what I've been thinking when I've been reading it, and when we picked it for reading just before we came on stage, is that the title, On the Irreversibility of Time, that's somewhere in the high modernist tradition. It could have been, I immediately think of T.S. Eliot and his poems on time. And there is a lovely, lovely development in the poem, that poem with such a grand title, almost a pretentious title, if you don't mind. And it turns out to be about a teacup, and it's a very sensual poem as well. There is so much of taste and smell in it, and so that's why I'm really fond of your turning away from the Eliot Pound tradition and writing a poem with very everyday content, which still carries its title, carries its contents so beautifully. It is really about the tragical irreversibility of time, and it's also about a common teacup. Well, that was just in praise of that poem.
Thank you.
And you can choose another one to continue.
Okay. What shall we do? Shall I take this one about the tit for tat?
And mention something about the way you composed your books. What poems you choose for each and every one of them?
Well, this book actually is, I only did 50 copies. I did it for a special reading on International Women's Day. So the poems in it, some of them are in other books too. But I kind of like this because I wrote it when I was in Greece at a workshop with Alicia Stallings. I wrote a poem every day there, and all of them were keepers. She said, go do that. And we went away and did it. And all of them were keepers, imagine. And this was a ballad, which I had not tried before. But a ballad, as you know, will have a lot of repetition. And there's an expression in this that Jonas thought perhaps I should explain. Tit for tat. That means that if you are Swedish, we say in Swedish, tit for tat.
Tit for tat, yeah, but I really don't know how to translate it. Just explain the meaning of it.
Yeah, well, it means that if you do something do one thing and you get something back from it. If you hurt me, I hurt you back. Yeah.
There's much like that, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Yeah,
yeah, right. And also, it's the sound of it, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. Sounds to me like a train. So.
And it's a blues ballad, really. So it's and railway songs are so common within the blues tradition.
Right. So it's kind of longish. So hold on to your hats. Bad bed blues. I climbed on a fast train wearing my new Sunday hat. I climbed on a fast train wearing my new satin hat. There's rails all singing tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat. I come early from church feeling low and so heartsick. I come early from church like a candle without no wick. I come early from church. I was cut right to the quick. Put my gloves on the table and my handbag on the floor. Put my good book on the table and open the bedroom door. Lordy, what I see, I won't never see no more. See my man in our bad bed, naked as a jay. He was sweating in our bad bed, humping Billy May. She's the sassy, no-count gal, leading good men astray. Billy May, her style ain't nothing like my style. She could get any man around for 100 miles. She'd get him and keep him a week or a little while. She know what she got to show, and she liked to show it. She got a brass horn to toot, and she liked to blow it. But he was my man, my will, and Billy May know it. On my soul, I'm the common law wife of that cheating man. Sold my soul to the devil when that knife flew into my hand. This train gonna take me over to Alabama. Billy May, she's a gal, give all men what they want. Billy May smell good, and she strut so grand and gaunt. Billy May, she a ghost now, got her a place to haunt. Left a man in our bad bed, staring at the wall. Left my man in our bad bed, handsome, dead, and tall. I'm feeling so bad, like a baby about to bawl. I'm riding a fast train, decked out in my Sunday hat. I'm riding in my last train. That sheriff knows where he's at. Them rails keep a humming tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat.
Have you ever been a singer?
Not really. I sing, but used to sing, but never professionally.
No, microphone closer to your lips if you want to sing.
Pardon me?
Microphone closer to your lips.
Okay.
Yeah, you should imitate the singer.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I interrupted you. Have you ever been a singer?
No.
No. You should have been.
I'm a poet.
Yes, but just to point out, there is such an amount of musicality to your poems, and once again, I think you all heard that the beautiful combination or union of what is really a very tragic poem, this, and by using the traditional the verse of the blues, the 3-line verse of the blues, there is also not exactly, but something of a humorous quality to it, which is intentional, I take it.
All tragedy is comic, all comedy is tragic. That's a truism.
And what part does, once again, form, meter, and rhyme have to play in that? Is that a way of joining the tragic and the comic?
I think they're opposite sides of the same coin. And it's not original to say that. That's, I think people would agree with that. If you look, for example, at Shakespeare comedy, it's tragic. You look at his tragedy, there's comedy in it also. You have to have, if you don't have both of them, when you're talking about a really strong subject, I think, then you will become pretentious. You will be overly serious, and that won't work. You have to have something that breaks, that goes into both, I think.
I think you're right as well, but it's not very common in a Swedish tradition ever since modernism came to Sweden, and we lost a lot of the metric and the rhyming tradition. It got consigned to song, to lyrics, and the light verse, which is it got consigned to the newspapers. It was the verse of the day, and which was almost by definition not considered, not really poetry, and and also it wasn't really meant to be to have serious content. So what you're doing actually by publishing your books and by working in Sweden is reinstating a tradition that has been lost. We have a couple of books to go to work our way through, so pick the next one.
Okay.
And the book is The Stranding. Some of you will be able to see that. And what is the framework of that one?
What is what?
What is the framework of that collection?
The framework of that. Well, it's a bunch of love poems, and yeah, that was the framework of it. I wrote a really long poem called The Stranding, which I really liked and never got published, but I thought it was a pretty decent poem anyway. It was probably too long to be published in most places. And so I took that as a title poem, and then I put these others together. The one that I'm going to read now is called Film Noir. And it is I also wrote this in Greece. It's a sonnet. You know how in the movies they must meet, those lovers whom the script has torn apart. Though they loved with a passion bittersweet, war or bad karma tipped their apple cart. He, perhaps, deceived by that blonde tart, or she, to keep her brother out of jail, with weeping eyes said yes to some old fart. Fade out with violins and nightingale. They meet again. No. Flash forward 20 years. Resume the tale. They meet again. What luck. Both ways are older, and he is rich and strong, she fair and frail. Oh, happy end. He reaches to enfold her. That's when I blow my nose, for in real life, I go to films and you go to your wife. Sorry, I messed up that one.
I'm Dorothy Parker here, even though she wrote before the days of the film noir. What have your influences been?
She's one of them, definitely. And there was a poet I read when I was a girl, because back in those days, there were all the magazines had poetry. All the American magazines had real poetry. You could read the real poets in just ordinary magazines. And I think it's a pity that has gone by the wayside. It's really a pity. And there was a poet called Phyllis McGuinney who I read when I was a kid. And I sort of absorbed it. I knew a lot of poems by heart when I was a kid. So yes, Dorothy Parker, definitely one of my influences.
What about contemporary poetry? Have you any colleagues within contemporary poetry that you especially like?
Oh yes, Melissa Bailman, who is the editor of used to be Light Quarterly, and now it's not. Now it's Light Quarterly. It used to be every month or bi-monthly, I think. It's one of the oldest magazines. And Melissa is the editor. She took it over when the founder died. And it's really marvelous. You can go in and find it on the internet. I have a lot of friends who write in that.
So you published 6 books in the span of a year and a half. How many poems do you send off per year to all these international magazines?
When I was younger, I always had about 25 or 30 out, not too different, maybe 3 or 4 at a time. So I always had a lot of, I don't now, because I don't know why, because I'm old, I guess. But I used to always have them, because when you send out a lot, if you get a rejection, you don't mind. You got a lot more coming in, and you just look at it, and if you think, well, this is good, it's just the wrong place to send it, you send it out again. Or you look at it and you say, good thing they didn't take this one because it needs some correction.
Have you an idea how many poems you've written over the years?
I published, I've had about maybe almost 400. Yeah, but I've got some that not published also.
I can imagine. So are there more books to come?
Oh, yeah. I'm putting it all together now. I've got at least 3 more books. And maybe I write prose also. So I've got a lot of stories that I might put. You see, the reason I would say I'm self-publishing, as you know, Jonas, because I used to think I would not self-publish. I was too good for that. I thought I'll have to win a big contest and I get published. But the difficulty has been to write in English, living in Sweden, that it really just changed, because people who publish books want you to be there, go to readings, do signings, and so forth. And I can't move over from Sweden to America every time, you know. And they need you to do your own promotion. So this is my solution. I always said I'll never self-publish, but now I've done it, and I'm happy about that.
Good thing you did. Your readers are grateful. You may have noticed that the choice of poems is not arbitrary at all. The film noir, the time poem, fits in very nicely with our backdrop here, and I think that the film noir poem did so as well. Also, we have wanted to point out this wonderful juxtaposition within the comic and the serious, the dark and the light. And also there's will you agree that there is a strong feminist tendency in your poetry? A feminist tendency, or a feminist, yeah.
Right. Every woman worth her salt has a feminist.
Actually, you just have to look at the cover of this book. So it is fairly obvious. We have a couple more poems to go, I think.
Okay. Let's see what we've got here.
This one is from a collection called Green Ivy Grows Over Their Graves, Tra-la. And, well, you can't get more comic and tragic in one book title than that, I think.
Yeah. This is I want to mention this because it's an interesting form. Can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a quatrain, and every time the first line moves to the second line in the second verse, and it moves to the third line in the third verse, and ends with as the fourth line in the fourth verse. And this is called To a Young Woman Leaning at the Bridge Rail. This river flows for its own sake, playing peekaboo with bones. It goes about its business calmly. Your heartache does not distract it, my wan cabbage rose. You seek its gravelly bed for soft repose. This river flows for its own sake, not yours. It never stops or slows when love and parties slow and stop to take a bite of stolen bike or bridal cake or your sweet liver and a slice of nose. This river flows for its own sake, not yours. Leeches and hungry minnows feed her too, like wedding guests. Who knows or cares what lies around the bend to take a bloated thing in pantyhose? For its own sake, this river flows.
Here is the theme of time again. Of course, the flowing river, the flowing time.
I'm so glad you see those things, Jonas. You're a very perceptive reader. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a poem addressed to a young woman leaning on a bridge, perhaps intending to throw herself over that rail and drown. When was it written?
When was it written? I think maybe about 10 years ago.
Because what strikes me is that you've been writing poetry. You came to Sweden in 1961. You'd sent off your first poems just before that. So it's a cool 60 years of writing, and your books will gather poems published over a period of time, but they seem so contemporary. The poems actually seem very fresh, very newly written. Do you work them over? Do you rewrite stuff before you publish in book form?
If I what?
Do you rewrite it? Do you update your poems?
Yeah. I write them maybe. Sometimes they're completely finished when I do it. I just let it lie overnight and then I change a word or two. Sometimes I work on it for years before I think it's finally finished. And this poem that I read about a young woman leaning at the bridge rail, that's one of the poems that I wrote because I wanted to try that form. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I have a number of those. And just as you say, it's about time, because there's always, in every poem like that, there's a kind of descent to something else. And it's a good form for writing about time.
So the young woman is addressed by the poet. Is it to a certain extent Janice, as she is now, that is speaking to a younger version of herself? Would you accept that reading, that way of reading, that way of understanding the poem?
I think everything that everybody writes is about themselves, and then you lie and say, "No, it's not about me." I think good poetry, it always comes from somewhere in your mind, in your heart. If it's any good, it has to be honest, and that's the only source you have. You have yourself. That's the only source that you have.
We are nearing the close of this talk, and even though we have not yet been given the 5 minutes left sign, which is a good thing, because it means that we will be able to touch upon another aspect of your writing, and that is translation. You have never yet showed me anything that you've written directly in Swedish, but there are a number of such poems as well.
That I translated?
No, it's poems that you've written in Swedish.
Oh yeah, well, that's an interesting question, because when I used to sit in the old town in Stockholm, and when I was finished with my dishwashing, and try to write, and then life went on, and I came to Östergötland, and I was still writing in English, and I wanted to find other friends who wrote. Also, that's how I got connected with the Fringe. But I saw that there was a group of writers, and I went to them and I said, "Can I join you? Because I want to have some friends who write like I do." And they said, "Yeah, we're going to have a weekend thing, and you can be part of that." But then when I got there, they said, "But you have to write in Swedish." And I've never done that before. But okay, so I did. And the first poem that I wrote had it published in Fönstret, Yeah, it was really nice. It was my very first poem. And so then I started writing both Swedish and English. Then I went over to only write in Swedish. And then after a number of years, I thought, English is my mother tongue. It's the one that I really, really can write in. So I was published in Canada and some Canadian magazines and some American magazines also. But Canada has really been good to me. They are really nice. And so then I just went over and wrote only in English. So I don't write in Swedish anymore. I hardly speak Swedish anymore.
But you do translations from the Swedish. And we will now start our descent into the end of this program. But I found out that you translated Harriet Löwenhjelm, and which is, of course, the perfect person to read poems by here in Tranås, as Harriet Löwenhjelm spent the last period of her life as a suffering from tuberculosis at Romanäs sanatorium, quite close to Tranås. And there will be an event, a Tranås event in 2022, celebrating Harriet Löwenhjelm, as she should be celebrated. And Harriet Löwenhjelm would be an older sister to you. She also knew how to combine the comic and the tragic. She was also a master of form, and still able to play around with that form, not to get too formal. And the translation that you will read in your translation, and that I will read in Swedish, is of what is considered to be her very last poem. We don't have to be that melodramatic, but it is certainly a deathbed poem. Tag mig, håll mig, smek mig sakta. Famna mig varligt en liten stund. Gråt ett grand för så trista fakta. Säg mig med ömhet sova en blund. Gå ifrån mig. Du vill ju stanna. Stanna tills själv jag måste gå. Lägg din älskade hand på min panna. En liten stund är vi två. It's a difficult poem to read. I'm almost breaking out in tears.
It's true. It's true. I think when I was listening to you, it really moves. It's really a moving poem. So it's very difficult to translate a really wonderful poem into another language. So this is what I've done. Hold in the fold of me, gently touch me, comfort me this little while. Let fall a tear for facts so dreary. See me slumber, fondly smile. Linger in our here and now. Stay until I must leave you. Your hand lies on my mortal brow. Yet a little while we are two.
Many thanks. And this, I think, is a very good ending to this talk. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me and for, above all, for listening to Janice D Soderling.
Thank you.
We'll see each other next year, I hope.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you very much, Jonas. Thank you.